fireworks and pyrotechnics today. Woohoo! So yeah, my name is Dave X. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I do first. I work full-time as the fire safety manager for Burning Man. I review all the projects that are lit on fire, all the pyrotechnic displays, and all the structure fires that go on at the event. Last year we had 52 structure fires, 9 pyrotechnic displays, and over 300 flame effects that needed reviewing. And you know, a lot of events would be happy to burn one structure and have a small pyrotechnic display and call it a day, but that's not how we roll at Burning Man. Fire and burning is the first word in our event, so we take that pretty seriously. I'm also a California licensed pyrotechnic operator. I've been working for Pyro Spectacular for a little over 10 years, and I've been licensed with them for a little over 5 years. I do displays for the Oakland A's, the San Francisco Giants, the Oakland Raiders, and the San Francisco 49ers. I was also lucky enough to work on the San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge 75th anniversary celebration, and that was about $1 million worth of fireworks going up there. And if I live another 25 years, I look forward to doing the 100th. So cross your fingers for me. I also have been trained in LP gas effects, and that's one of my specialties in the industry. I've taken several training courses on handling LP gas, on inspecting LP gas effects, and propane gas effects are really kind of a new area in the pyrotechnics field, and a lot of people are moving towards that. Now that fireworks are becoming more and more regulated, the use of flame effects, LP gas flame effects, is really growing in the field, so I feel lucky to have gotten in on that, on the ground of that. So I'm going to start out talking a little bit about what fireworks are in general and talking about some definitions of fireworks that will be important as we go forward in this talk. So fireworks are any composition or device for the purpose of producing a visible or audible effect by combustion or deflagration. And so basically that's a lot of technical jargon, but basically what fireworks are chemical compositions which do not need the presence of an outside oxidizer to produce heat or light. And this is your typical firework shell here. I'm going to use my little pointer, and I wish I could point at both sides at the same time, but unfortunately I can only point at one, and I'm going to walk you through a firework shell here. Oh, and of course the pointer doesn't work on the screen. So basically the fuse comes in at the top of your average firework shell. It goes down onto the bottom. If you see on the bottom of the firework shell, there's kind of a gravelly material. That material is black powder. The shell would be loaded into a tube called a mortar, and as that black powder is ignited, it produces a tremendous amount of gas, which shoots out the ball of the firework out of the mortar like a cannonball. At the same time that it shoots out of the mortar tube, the time fuse is lit on the bottom of the shell, and as it rises into the sky, the time fuse bursts at a very predetermined rate. Fireworks generally rise 100 feet per each inch in diameter. So a 6-inch shell, which is quite average on a pyrotechnic display, is going to about 600 feet in the air. They generally break open, which is called the burst, at 50 to 75 feet per inch in diameter. So a 6-inch shell going up 600 feet is going to make a 300-foot wide burst when it breaks open, depending on the effect. So once the time fuse reaches its predetermined length, it passes the fire into the center of the shell, where it comes in contact with black powder coated rice hulls. Those are the granular materials that you see in the center of the shell. You don't use black powder in the center of the shell because the black powder would break too hard and destroy the stars and the pyrotechnic components in there, which produce the visual effect. So we use a lightly coated rice hull, and when that ignites, it produces just enough gas to break open the shell without damaging the stars that are on the inside, and it also ignites the stars, which are the visual effect that you see raining back down. So you've got your black powder lift charge, the time fuse, the burst charge, and then the ignition of the stars as they come out. On the top of this shell, you can also see a couple things which are called comets or tails. As this shell leaves the gun, the fire is also igniting those tails, and that's what leaves that golden trail as it rises up into the air. So you see that little trail or tail as it rises up into the sky. So there's two general types of fireworks. There's the first kind, which is 1.4G consumer fireworks. 1.4G are the type of fireworks that are for consumer use and for the general public. Of course, we live in the great state of California, where you're relegated to safe and sane fireworks, which aren't even really worth buying. But I won't go into my personal political opinions here. If you go to the great state of Nevada, you can buy 1.4G commercial fireworks. And I'm sure we're all familiar with those. The most common type, on the right there, you see your firecrackers. On the left there, on the upper left, you can see a great fireworks store from Nevada. I believe that one is in Pahrump. On the lower left-hand corner, you've got your commercial mortars. In the middle on the bottom, you've got commercial 1.4G rockets. And then on the lower right, you have what's called a cake or a multi-shot device. A cake generally has up to 12 or 24 small mortars within it, and each one of those small mortars has its own effect. So when you light one fuse on the bottom of a device like that, it sets them all off in a prescribed order. So it's like a fireworks show in a box. The second type of firework, which I deal with primarily, are called 1.3G display fireworks. And these are fireworks that are intended for use by licensed pyrotechnic operators only at commercial displays where we have the proper permits. We've transported the fireworks using a hazmat driver's license. We've kept careful logs of what comes in, what comes out. We haven't left the truck alone at any point where bad things could happen to it. And we store these materials properly in a licensed magazine and a storage facility, which is kept under guard and visual eye on at all times so bad things don't happen. Examples of these fireworks, if you look in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see a typical shell that goes into a gun. That's a 6-inch diameter. In the middle on the upper corner is basically what the load of fireworks looks like when it arrives on a fireworks site there. They're all carefully boxed and marked as a hazardous material. On the upper right-hand side, you'll see a specialty shell. This is a 10-inch diameter shell, and those little items that you see attached to it are called rising effects. As this shell leaves the gun, a little fuse starts dropping those littler shells as it rises. So you'll get a series of small fireworks bursting off in the air until finally you get the big 10-inch burst above it. So you get kind of a boom, 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 and then bam, the big explosion on the top. On the bottom left-hand corner, you see what's called water cakes. Those are another specialty item. You see that they're angled off there at a 45-degree angle. Those are designed to shoot off little floating fireworks that we can use out on the bay, or if you're doing a show on a lake or a pond, and those effects will float on the water surface and then shoot off little fireworks on the water surface. It's called a water cake. And then some other type of fireworks here are what's called a comet, and the red one is a comet. And basically when you see a firework that comes up and it's just a streak of fire in the sky but no explosion at its apex, that's called a comet. And often we'll do a comet look where a series of those come out at angles and cross over, and that's called a comet walk or a comet look. The other type of firework there on the middle on the right-hand side is called a mine. And a mine is basically using all the components that are inside of a fireworks shell, but just coming out of the tube directly. So on those fireworks, you get a big spray of sparks coming out in a big cone. And all the different effects that you would get up in an aerial firework are just spraying out at a big angle. So often the comets and the mines are used in a lower level look. So you might have the comets going back and forth and then mines going straight up, and then we'll put up a big row of shells above that, so you get a real full sky look. You get the large shells breaking in the upper sky, and you get your mines and comets in the lower sky. So you've got fire and pyrotechnics from the ground all the way to the upper edges of your high aerial shells. So what is a fireworks display? Well, I looked it up, and a fireworks display is defined as a presentation of fireworks for a public or private gathering. Well, hey, that's pretty. I'm glad that we have these kind of internet resources that I could look that up and relay that information to you, because I'm sure you were confused by that. But what you're really wondering is what goes into that display. Well, it all begins with a careful plan. Most electronic displays, especially those matched to musical, are first designed on a computer, and this is an example of the Fireworks program which we use to choreograph a fireworks display before it's programmed into a pyro musical or a pyro digital show. Of course, then we have to look at site selection. That's one of the most important things. We go to an area and we look and see where we could set up the firework display material, the racks, the mortars, all of that equipment, and make sure that we have a proper terrain, that it's not sloped or too bumpy. We want to make sure that we could set those mortars on a flat and level surface. We want to make sure that there's no fields of grass nearby or anybody's paper mache collection nearby that might be ignited accidentally, or a kindergarten or any number of other flammable sites that may be too close to the pyrotechnic display. We want to make sure that we've got the proper distance to the audience. Each individual shell has a predetermined distance to the audience. So if we can't get a great enough distance, we might be limited in the size of shells that we can use. You may see the fireworks shows for the San Francisco Giants. Normally on a fireworks show, we would like to set the fireworks right in the back of the stadium, but there's not enough room in the back of the Giants stadium there. So we have to actually set that display up on a barge, which is floating out in the bay beyond the stadium, to make sure that we have enough distance and clearance from the audience there, and that we don't have any fall down or debris onto the audience there. We also got to make sure that that site can be secured with some kind of fence, and that people who are a little bit out of their minds on 4th of July drink or whatever don't walk accidentally into the site, or that kids don't ride their bikes into the fireworks site. So it's important to check out your site for type of terrain, flammable hazards, and distance to audience, as well as site security. Once you've decided on a site, then you do your site layout. We design these shows with numbers of racks. Each rack contains a number of mortars which launch the fireworks, and this is a typical layout that we'll use to design where we're going to place the mortar tubes in groups and how many guns we'll need for the desired show. So this is something that we would get in a product order from our company, and it'll tell us how many racks, how many setups, and they're set up in a cluster that we'll need. It'll also talk about any angles. Sometimes if we have enough room, we like to angle the guns so that instead of just straight up and filling a narrow area of the sky, if we angle the guns, we could set off several fireworks at once and fill a wider area of the sky. So when we get this map, as you can see, all the arrows are pointing straight up. I knew that I had to set up this show pointed straight up. This is actually one of the sites from the closing show for Candlestick Park when we did the last the Niners game there over at Candlestick and had the big firework display. Then we get a cue sheet that talks about the order that the fireworks shows will be fired. And we use that to figure out how we're going to layer the sky with bigger shells on top, smaller shells on the bottom, when the fireworks shells will be set off in the order of the show, and if there's any special effects like mines or comets. So now that we've done all our pre-planning, we get to the day of the show, we drive the truck over there, and we're going to get ready for the show. And there's a lot of pressure on, as you can imagine. We don't want to screw this up, because there's usually thousands of people who've come for this pyrotechnic display. It's not something where you can just call up and say, you know, I got a cold today, I don't think I'm coming to the fireworks show. You'll have to get some high school kids to shoot that off for me, because I'm not making it. It doesn't work that way. You got to go one way or the other. The show must go on. So the first thing we do is we unload the truck. And kind of remarkably, this is the most dangerous step of any fireworks show. The fireworks all come on a large pallet like that, and when you're inside the truck handling those boxes of fireworks, if one firework accidentally goes off, it's like being inside of a firecracker. They're all going to go off, and you're in a confined space. When accidents happen inside a truck of fireworks, everybody dies or everybody is seriously injured. Some of the most horrific fireworks accidents where we've lost large numbers of people have happened in the unloading and loading of the truck. The truck is the most dangerous aspect of any fireworks show. The next thing we do is we set up the mortar racks in order to get ready for the show. We nail groups of them together very securely. One of the things you want to avoid is those racks coming apart and falling over sideways. The worst thing that could ever happen is a rack falling to the side and shooting fireworks horizontally into the audience instead of straight up. We've all seen accidents where racks have come apart and shot horizontally, and that's when audience members are injured. So nailing them together securely is very important. We then take the fireworks out of the boxes in groups. We never put out all the fireworks at once. We want to do them very slowly and in groups, so if something happens and one goes off, only a small amount of product is out at any given time. So we usually lay out a caliber at a time. A caliber is a size of gun. We have everything from 3-inch all the way up to 10-inch here in the Bay Area that we shoot. And so generally these are 4- and 5-inch shells laid out on their guns. We'll load those all once, then we'll move on to the next caliber. Each shell is carefully placed in its own mortar tube. Again, we're using extreme caution as we slide them into the tube. We have a motto, and it's never put any part of your body over the guns that you want to keep. As you're loading those guns, you need to be very careful as you're loading them in. I actually had an incident once where we ran a continuity check, which is sending a small electrical signal to each shell to make sure that it's connected, and we saw that a few weren't connected. I went over with my little electrical tester, and as I kneeled down to test it with my electrical tester and touched it on the tester, that 6-inch shell went right off, level with my face there. Luckily, my face was an 8-inch safety margin from that gun, but it did have so much force that it sucked the hat off my head and it threw it into the bay. And I leaped up, and I was, again, lucky that I lived. So you got to be very careful as you load those mortars. Things can happen. Once the shell is in the gun, it's safe, and if it goes off, it's going to go up in the air and it's going to be safe. While it's laying on the gun on the top, like you saw in that previous picture, it's danger zone, because if one goes off, they're all going to ignite. So once they're in the mortars, we're ready to go and ready to connect them to some kind of controller. In the first scenario I'm going to show you, this is a pyro-digital show. Pyro-digital shows are when you have a music soundtrack and you want to sync up the fireworks with the music soundtrack that is playing. That kind of show is designed by the big guys down in Southern California, and they'll send a program up, and that'll get loaded on one of these pyro-digital controllers. So that means that there's a soundtrack playing, and as that soundtrack is playing, there's predetermined sync signals which are going to fire those fireworks in the proper order. So as we get each shell dropped in the tube, we attach these firing modules. Each module has a number of connections where you can then connect the electrical matches which are going to ignite the shows, and then each one of those modules is connected to the shells with these small wires. You see an example of somebody wiring those shells right here. Each module then is run back to this pyro-digital control unit, and each controller is connected then back to the area where they're sending the signal. In the case of the Golden Gate Bridge show, we actually had 28 of these controllers. The show was so large that no one controller could run the whole show, so we had a whole group of them along the length of the bridge. We had 3 barges floating below, and each barge had its own pyro-digital controller, and going up both of the towers were several pyro-digital controllers. The site was so vast that the small signal sent out from the regular control unit couldn't reach all of those, so we actually buried the sync signal in the KFOG radio music track that was playing along, and we turned these controllers to run our computers through that signal that was coming through the air from the KFOG radio so that we could reach all of those controllers simultaneously. That was quite an interesting show, and I think one of my favorite memories I'll share with you from that show is, you know, I was lucky enough to get the position which was on the bridge during the show, and I was halfway across in the center of the bridge at my little pyro position there. And my favorite moment was when they stopped the traffic on the bridge for 20 minutes, and then right before the show they turned off the lights on the bridge. Right before a fireworks show goes, your nerves are like so on edge because there's so much danger, so much adrenaline, and so much excitement. I was so keyed up. And when those lights went off and there was no traffic, I actually heard the song of the bridge. I heard the little pieces of metal clanking underneath the bridge. I heard the wind going through. I was in a moment of silence on the Golden Gate Bridge, which, unless the apocalypse happened or something terrible happened in my life, I'm not likely to hear total silence and darkness on the Golden Gate Bridge at any other point. And really hearing that song is going to be one of those life memories that I carry with me for the rest of my life. So I digress here, and going back to the field controller. So now all those modules are hooked to the field controller, and we're ready to go. When it's finally time for the show, we do a last check to make sure that we're in sync with the unit that's sending out the signal, either from the stadium or, like I said, KFOG radio. This is an example of a couple of those positions on the bridge there. This is the big unit below there, which was broadcasting signal both to KFOG radio and to some of the closer controllers. And when we run sync, it's making sure that all of those units are running sync. A little bit of code squeaks out, and all of those controllers will show that they're in sync, so we can confirm that we're on target. Once it's time to actually fire the fireworks show, all the operator has to do is simply hold down a dead man switch on each one of these controllers. Then when the show starts and wherever they're controlling it, that's firing all the shells. Now, if something bad happens in the firing site, or someone comes in, or someone's injured, or racks have fallen over, that operator can simply remove his finger from the dead man, and that section of the show is going to stop. We also have the ability, if we see that one of those groups of racks, like let's say the 10-inch guns, have had some problem, we can go into the controller and cut out just the 10-inch guns so that the rest of the show can keep firing, and we don't have to stop the entirety of the show. We could just keep going with the undamaged guns. So that's how a pyro-digital show works. Now I'm going to tell you about one of my favorite kinds of shows here, which are old school, and that's called hand-fired delight. And we only get these a few times. Most shows have moved on to electric firing now, but when we do 4th of July shows, not everybody can get a digital controller or even a pinboard electric system. There's just not enough electric firing systems in California for everybody to draw that card. So some people don't like it, but I relish the hand-fired show. In a hand-fired show, you're actually taking a road flare and you're lighting each shell by hand with the road flare. And it's quite exciting, as you can imagine. Once you light it with the road flare, there's 2 seconds or less between the time you light that quick match fuse and the time that it goes off. As you light them, they're in a row. Let's say the row is here. As you go to light it, you light it and then you immediately turn your back and you go down low, so if something happens that it breaks over your back. Now the boss told me a wise thing that's always stuck with me. He said, Dave, always keep your butt to the rack when it goes off, because it's way easier to make your butt look like your butt again than your face look like your face again. That's very important with fireworks. Never look directly at them. Keep your butt to it. So then you go down these rows here, as you can see, and you're lighting each one by hand. It's very dramatic as you're lighting them. And it really takes a brave crew. This is my crew that I use out on the 4th of July. They refer to themselves as the powder kegs, and they are fearless, my crew here. They fear nothing. And of course, I take the 4th of July seriously, as you can see by my awesome America shirt there. It's funny because I might be a little bit alternative in my regular life, but come 4th of July, I'm crying red, white, and blue tears of joy as these fireworks are going off. I really get into it, and there's nothing like the spirit of 4th of July. And I kind of, I always tell my crew that we're like the fireworks people on the 4th of July are like the shamans of 4th of July. We're there to bring that spirit of celebration to all the people who've come out to celebrate, and there's a lot of responsibility on you. Just like any shaman, you can't act haphazardly and just have everybody looking frogs or whatever. You got to make sure that everything goes smoothly and that it's a careful and pre-planned and a safe event. And so I'm really thankful to have this great crew. And of course, that crew needs to be properly attired. We all wear something called turnouts, which are firemen's clothing here, because a lot of fire is going to rain down, and these coats will protect you. Each person who's doing the hand light is followed by a second person. As that person is leaning over doing the hand light, a lot of fire rains down, and that second person is there to brush the fire off of your back, because a lot of embers will get stuck on the back of your jacket or in your hairline here, and that second person is there to keep brushing the fire off. Or if something goes wrong, that second person is there to throw you on the ground before something goes terribly wrong. Because like it shows in this picture, when you go to light them, fire is raining down like nothing else. That's an example of the team going out there. The person on the right there just lit that shell. The person on the left is going to stand up immediately after that shell has gone off and brush fire off of the lighter's back there. And the show must go on. Nothing can ever stop the show. I one time was out at a show and I was lighting a 5-inch shell. As I lit it, they usually make a very distinct sound when they go off. You light it, you turn your back, and whack, you hear it go up in the air. It's very distinct. This one I lit, and I just heard a and I thought, oh man, that's not right. And as I looked back, I could see the shell teetering on the edge of the gun, and it just kind of flopped over on the other side of the rack, and I knew I just had the amount of time fuse that was in it before it went off, and I again took a crouching position, and it went off, and it blew that rack apart. Now, luckily, the mortar tube was laid out in such a way that I was actually in it like a shrapnel shadow, and I managed to none of the shrapnel from the wood went in my back. It went on both sides of me, and I got up, and I just kept going down the rest of the show. Later, after I finished that show, the fire marshal said, man, I thought you were dead. I was grabbing my radio. I was ready to call in the ambulance. But God bless you, Mr. America. You just kept going, and the show went on. So I was proud. The show's got to go on, and you can't be afraid. You can't stop. You can't be hesitant. You got to keep the timing going, too. There's a timing to these shows that's written in our work orders. And if I'm hesitant and I slow up, the show's going to go too long. If I speed up and go too fast, the show's going to go too short. So I got to make sure I get the timing just right as well. So I love a good show, and I'm glad that I'm in the fireworks industry, and I'm really proud to be part of it, and I'm proud that people find me responsible enough to do this kind of thing. In high school, they made me the special effects director for my stage crew, and I thought that was like the greatest thing ever. When they gave me the 2 bottles of flash powder and said, make it so, I was beaming with pride, and I still carry that same pride into my work today. So where can you guys go to see a great fireworks display? Well, the next big one that we're going to be doing is the Oakland A's on June 13th. I really like the Oakland A's fireworks show because they allow you to go down on the field and set up a blanket after the game's over. You can go right down there, set up your blanket, bring your family, bring some snacks, and then we shoot off the fireworks from right in back of the Coliseum. Now here's a little pro tip for you. While the game is going on and before the game, we've already set up the racks of fireworks. If you look at the stadium on the side where the BART tracks are, there's some ramps that go down to the parking lot. On the north side ramp, you can actually look over the wall of the ramp there, and you can see our fireworks site. You're directly over it, and you can actually see what the fireworks site looks like before the fireworks show. Obviously, we clear that area out during the fireworks show, but before the show, you can really get a good eyes-on what a fireworks site looks like. So that's my pro tip. Oakland A's, June 13th. It's actually the Super Mario Brothers themed fireworks show, so that's going to be, wow, I don't even know what they got in mind, Super Mario Brothers, but we're going to make it so. I've got about 3 minutes left here. I wonder if anybody has any questions I could answer briefly. Yes. On KFOG, you wouldn't have heard that signal. It was buried in the background on a very different frequency. You would have just heard the soundtrack of the fireworks show. His question is, what would you have heard on KFOG during the Golden Gate Bridge show? It's the same for when we used to do KFOG Kaboom. The signal is buried in there in a tone that you would never hear. It can only be heard by the controllers, which can pull that signal out separately. Any more quick questions? Yes, question here.
I once set fire to a brand new minivan by putting a pyrotechnic wrong way, upside down on top of it. What's the most
yes, that.
You've destroyed?
What have I destroyed? Well, you bring up a good point. Is those fireworks, when we were looking back at them, are generally shaped like an ice cream cone. They have the shell on the top and the lift charge on the bottom. And it's very important when you're working with new pyros. A lot of people think it's like a rocket, and they'll put it upside down, but then, of course, the lift charge goes off, and it doesn't come out of the gun. It bursts in the gun. I don't think I've ever destroyed anything except myself in some rare occasions. One time somebody gave me this, they came up to me at Burning Man and said, Dave, I've got this solid rocket fuel here. I feel a little bit dangerous keeping this in my tent. Will you take control of this? And I thought, hey, I'll take control of that. Of course I will. And the whole event, I kept trying to light it off with various, I put a fuse on it and I tried to light it. I racked it in some black powder wicking. I tried to light it, and I threw it in a burn barrel, and it just kind of melted like plastic, and it never lit. By the end of the event, I thought, hey, this stuff is pretty much inert. I'm not even really sure this is rocket fuel. And at the end of the event, I have a little waste basket of kind of pyrotechnic scrap, and I threw it into that. And my normal plan is just to go over to these giant burn barrels that we have and just kind of lean down and dump all that material into the burn barrel and let it go where it will, let it go over my back. And I guess it laid next to some 2-part flash powder, which is very energetic. And as I dumped that in, that 2-part flash powder went off, and that was just enough to ignite that solid rocket fuel. And that went off, and it produced so much gas that it blew all the embers out of the burn barrel, and it was like a sheet of fire went over my back. Luckily, it angled over my back, but my hand was still there from where I was tapping the bucket into the barrel, and I definitely sizzled the top of my hand there as it went off. And I bravely went over to the cooler and put my hand down in the cooler. Everybody's like, "Are you okay, Dave?" I'm like, "I'm cool, no problem." That didn't start smart until about 2 days later, but let me tell you, that hurt for about a week. And then I had another fireworks show in the city. About a week later, I went over to do something at the San Francisco Giants, and my hand is all wrapped up in a bandage, and the fire marshal's, are you okay? And his confidence level went way down when I explained to him that it was a burn. So that's all I got. I think I'm done here. I'm glad you guys came for the talk, and yeah. Fireworks are your friend, but please be safe with them. Children, don't try this at home unless your parents aren't watching. Thank you. Oh.